I was fired for theft I didn't commit. It was all set up by my boss to cover his own schemes. While he spent the stolen money on a luxurious lifestyle, I quietly gathered evidence. And then I made sure he lost everything: his job, his family, his freedom. I had worked at Meridian Financial for 5 years. Not a dream job by any means, but it paid the bills and offered stability in an uncertain economy. I was diligent, followed protocols to the letter, and had built a solid reputation among my colleagues. My performance reviews consistently rated me as exceeding expectations, and I thought I was on track for the senior analyst position that would open up later that year. My desk was situated in a glass-walled pod with 4 other analysts. We processed client accounts and managed investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. Nothing particularly glamorous, but the clients trusted us with millions, and that responsibility meant something to me. Mark Davis had been appointed as our department head 18 months ago. He swept in from a competitor with promises of innovation and growth. Tall, with carefully maintained salt and pepper hair and designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, Mark had that easy confidence that seems to come naturally to those born into privilege. He drove a midnight blue Maserati and wore a watch worth more than my annual salary. "He's a rainmaker," our CEO had announced when introducing him. "Mark is going to take this division to new heights." From day one, something felt off about him. His smile never reached his eyes, and he had a habit of taking credit for others' work. But I kept my head down and focused on my clients. That's what mattered. Until that Tuesday in April. My morning had been routine: coffee, emails, client calls. Then my desk phone rang. "Jason, I need you in my office." Mark's voice was crisp, professional. Nothing in his tone suggested what was coming. I straightened my tie and grabbed a notepad, assuming he wanted to discuss the Henderson portfolio I had been restructuring. Mark's corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, fingers steepled, with Patricia Winters from HR beside him. My stomach dropped. "Close the door and take a seat," Mark instructed, his expression unreadable. I complied, feeling a strange detachment, as if watching myself in a movie. "Jason, we have a serious situation," Mark began, glancing briefly at Patricia. "The quarterly financial audit has uncovered inconsistencies in several client accounts. A total of $150,000 is unaccounted for." I blinked, processing his words. "That's concerning. Which accounts are affected?" "The Henderson, Blackwell, and Zhang portfolios," Mark replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "All managed exclusively by you." My mind raced. Those were indeed my clients, but I hadn't noticed any discrepancies. I opened the folder to find transaction records highlighted in yellow, withdrawals and transfers I had apparently authorized but had no recollection of. "There must be some mistake," I said, flipping through the pages. "I didn't process these transactions." Mark leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Your digital signature is on every one of them, Jason. The money was routed through a series of offshore accounts before disappearing." "That's impossible." I felt heat rising in my face. "Someone must have accessed my credentials." "Have you checked the system logs? IP addresses?" "We've conducted a thorough investigation," Patricia interjected, her voice carrying practiced sympathy. "The transactions were all initiated from your workstation during regular office hours. No evidence of system compromise was found." Mark removed his glasses, polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We're prepared to handle this internally, Jason. No police, no charges." Relief washed over me momentarily. "If," he continued, "you resign immediately and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of your departure." The implication was clear: admit guilt without saying it outright. "You want me to quit?" "I didn't take that money, Mark. I would never." "The evidence suggests otherwise," he cut in smoothly. Think about it, Jason. A public scandal, legal proceedings, possible jail time, or a quiet exit. Your choice. Patricia slid a document across the table. The separation agreement. You'll receive no severance or recommendations, but we won't pursue legal action. This is insane, I protested, my voice rising. I need to speak with the CEO. Mark's expression hardened. Roger already knows. The decision is final. I stared at them, reality sinking in. You really believe I stole from clients I've worked with for years? People who trust me with their financial futures. Mark's lips curved in what might have been a smile but looked more like a predator baring its teeth. What I believe doesn't matter. The money is gone, the evidence points to you, and this conversation is over. They gave me 30 minutes to clean out my desk, with security watching my every move. My colleagues avoided eye contact as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. 5 years reduced to a coffee mug, a few photos, and a dying desk plant. Rachel, my closest work friend, slipped me her personal number on a post-it. This doesn't add up, she whispered. Call me later. As the security guard escorted me to the lobby, I passed Mark in the hallway. He was on his phone, laughing about dinner reservations at Gibson's Steakhouse. Our eyes met briefly, and what I saw there chilled me. Not guilt or discomfort, satisfaction. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by job search websites and half-eaten takeout. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Something weird happened with those accounts last month. Mark requested temporary access for compliance review. Call me. And just like that, a suspicion crystallized into certainty. Mark hadn't merely allowed me to take the fall, he had orchestrated it. I didn't call Rachel back immediately. Instead, I began to research. Mark Davis had worked at 3 financial firms in the past decade, each position lasting about 2 years. LinkedIn and company press releases painted the picture of an ambitious executive rapidly climbing the corporate ladder. But digging deeper into financial news archives revealed a pattern. Each of his departures had coincided with organizational restructuring or strategic pivots. What really caught my attention was his lifestyle. His salary at Meridian was substantial but not extravagant by executive standards. Yet he lived in a Gold Coast penthouse, belonged to the most exclusive country club in Chicago, and had recently purchased a vacation home in Aspen, according to a society page mention of a housewarming party. The math didn't add up. I called Rachel the next day and met her at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the office. I think you're right about Mark, she said, voice low despite the ambient noise. After you left, I checked the system logs. Those transactions were processed using your credentials, but the access patterns were odd, all executed during your lunch breaks or when you were in documented meetings. Can you get me copies of those logs? She hesitated. Jason, if I get caught. I know I'm asking a lot, I acknowledged. But he set me up, Rachel. And if he did this to me, who else has he burned? Who's next? 2 days later, a thumb drive appeared in my mailbox with no return address. The logs confirmed my suspicions. Someone had used my credentials while I was verifiably elsewhere. Not enough to prove my innocence, but enough to fuel my determination. I needed more. Much more. Through LinkedIn, I connected with former colleagues from Meridian and Mark's previous employers. Most were hesitant to talk, but a pattern emerged from those who did. A former accountant named Elliot Chen had left Meridian 8 months before me, also under a cloud of suspicion. We met at a bar in Wicker Park, far from the financial district. Elliot was nervous, constantly checking the door. I found discrepancies, he confided after his second whiskey. Multiple vendor payments to companies that didn't exist. When I brought it to Mark's attention, he said he'd handle it. 2 weeks later, I was called into HR and accused of falsifying expense reports. They had evidence, receipts I'd supposedly submitted for reimbursement. Except I hadn't submitted them. Did you fight it? Elliot laughed bitterly. With what? My word against digital records. Besides, Mark made it clear, go quietly or face charges. I had a family to think about, a mortgage. I couldn't risk it. Do you still have your notes on those vendors? He hesitated, then nodded. I kept copies. Insurance, you know. Never thought they'd be useful. Those documents became the foundation of my investigation. The shell companies Mark had created were sophisticated but not impenetrable. Following the money required patience and meticulousness, skills I'd honed during my years analyzing portfolios. I created a spreadsheet tracking every fraudulent transaction, mapping the flow of funds through a labyrinth of accounts and entities. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Client funds would be temporarily diverted, laundered through fake vendors or phantom investments, then replaced using funds from other accounts, a financial shell game that stayed just ahead of monthly audit cycles. But Mark had made mistakes. His shell companies shared common elements, registration dates clustered within days of his hiring, mailing addresses that traced back to properties linked to his brother-in-law, recurring transactions on the 15th of each month. Most damning of all, the ultimate beneficiary of these transactions was a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Through public records and social media, I connected this company to Mark's renovation of his Aspen property and the purchase of his Maserati. Still, I needed more, something conclusive that would not just expose his fraud but destroy him completely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mark's executive assistant, Vanessa, contacted me through a disposable email address. I know what he did to you, she wrote. It wasn't the first time. Meet me tomorrow, 7 p.m., Lincoln Park Zoo, by the Sea Lion Pool. Vanessa was young, ambitious, and terrified. He's been having me create false documentation for years, she confessed as we walked past indifferent animals. Backdated memos, altered meeting minutes. I thought it was just covering for his absences or mistakes. Then I found the transfers. Why help me now? Because last week, he had me compile a file on Rachel. Vanessa's voice trembled. The same way he did with you before everything happened. Cold fury washed over me. He's planning to set her up next. Vanessa nodded. I didn't sign up for this. And I've been documenting everything, dates, instructions, all of it. I have recordings. Illinois being a two-party consent state for recordings, these might not be admissible in court. But they would be devastating in the court of public opinion. With Vanessa's evidence added to my growing arsenal, I began to formulate a plan. Not just to clear my name, but to ensure Mark Davis would never do this to anyone again. I started by creating an encrypted document containing all the evidence, transaction records, shell company documentation, witness statements, timeline of events. This became my insurance policy, stored securely with instructions for release should anything happen to me. Next, I carefully mapped Mark's vulnerabilities. His career was obvious, the fraud evidence would destroy that. But Mark's true weakness was his image. His carefully cultivated persona as a financial wunderkind, his social standing, his marriage to Caroline Davis, daughter of a prominent Chicago family. Caroline's Instagram showcased their perfect life, charity galas, European vacations, the diamond bracelet he'd given her for their anniversary. The caption read, 5 years with my ethical king. He worked so hard to make the world better. The irony was almost painful. I created an anonymous email account and drafted a message to Meridian's board of directors, the SEC, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Attached was a portion of my evidence, enough to trigger an investigation but not everything. I wanted them curious, digging, asking questions Mark couldn't answer. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I reached out to Caroline through a mutual connection, a former client who occasionally attended the same charity functions. I didn't reveal my situation, just arranged an introduction at a fundraiser for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Caroline was everything her social media suggested, poised, elegant, and completely unaware of how her lifestyle was funded. We chatted about art and travel, and I mentioned my recent career transition. Mark mentioned something about that, she said, sipping champagne. Such a shame when people make poor choices. I smiled. Indeed. Though appearances can be deceiving. Like that beautiful bracelet, anniversary gift, right? I saw it on your Instagram. She touched the diamonds instinctively. Mark is incredibly generous. He must be doing well. That piece looks like Cartier's Reflection Collection. Limited edition. Her smile faltered slightly. You know jewelry. I know value, I replied. And what things cost. We were interrupted by another guest, but the seed was planted. I followed up with a handwritten thank you note for the pleasant conversation, mentioning I'd be happy to provide financial advice should she ever need it. Inside the envelope, I included a small, seemingly innocuous document, a newspaper clipping about offshore accounts used in money laundering, with certain phrases highlighted. Meanwhile, I continued building relationships with Mark's other victims and whistleblowers from his past companies. Each had a piece of the puzzle, and together, we created a comprehensive picture of a decade-long fraud scheme. 3 months after my firing, I executed the next phase. I sent the carefully prepared evidence packages to regulators and Meridian's board, timing the delivery for the morning of the company's quarterly earnings call. I also sent a more personal package to Roger Jenkins, Meridian's CEO, including evidence that Mark had been skimming from the executive bonus pool, effectively stealing directly from Roger and other C-suite executives. The final touch was an anonymous letter to Caroline, detailing exactly how her luxurious lifestyle had been funded, with bank statements, property records, and photographs of Mark with his mistress at the Aspen house Caroline believed was being renovated. Then I waited. The first domino fell that same afternoon. Mark was called into an emergency board meeting. By evening, Meridian had issued a press release announcing his immediate leave of absence pending an internal investigation. The SEC moved with surprising speed, freezing assets associated with the shell companies. FBI agents arrived at Meridian's offices the following morning. Rachel texted me updates throughout the day, feds everywhere. Mark's office sealed. They're pulling all his files. Caroline filed for divorce 3 days later, her attorney making a pointed statement to the press about profound betrayal of trust and her shock at these disturbing allegations. I watched from afar as Mark's world imploded. His assets frozen, reputation in tatters, former allies distancing themselves with practiced corporate amnesia. We always had concerns about his methods. The criminal charges came 2 weeks later: wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. Mark was arrested leaving his attorney's office, the perp walk captured by local news cameras I'd anonymously tipped off. His once immaculate appearance had deteriorated, rumpled suit, dark circles under haunted eyes. His attorney issued a statement claiming misunderstandings and promising full cooperation, but the evidence was overwhelming. Meridian's HR department contacted me with a carefully worded non-apology, suggesting we discuss the circumstances of my departure. I agreed to a meeting but brought my own attorney, who negotiated not just reinstatement but a promotion and substantial compensation for the unfortunate misunderstanding. On my first day back, I walked past Mark's former office, now occupied by an interim director, and felt a curious emptiness. The revenge I'd meticulously crafted had worked perfectly. Mark had lost everything: career, reputation, marriage, freedom. The charges against him carried potential sentences totaling over 30 years. Yet as I settled into my upgraded corner office, I realized revenge hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd anticipated. The anger that had fueled me for months had burned down to cold ashes. I glanced at my phone, a text from Caroline, who I'd been quietly advising through her divorce proceedings: dinner tonight to celebrate the settlement. My treat. I found myself typing, looking forward to it, before turning to my new responsibilities. Mark would spend years in federal prison. His name was now synonymous with fraud in Chicago financial circles. Everything he valued had been stripped away. And me? I had my reputation back, a better position, and the knowledge that justice had been served. But as I looked out over the Chicago skyline, I wondered what it had cost me, those months of single-minded focus on destruction, the coldness I'd cultivated to execute my plan. I pulled up my calendar to check the time of my dinner with Caroline. Perhaps there was something to salvage from this saga after all. Not just professional redemption, but something more personal. The phone on my desk rang, a client with concerns about market volatility. I pushed thoughts of Mark and revenge aside, focusing on the future rather than the past. Some wounds leave scars, reminders of lessons painfully learned. Mine had taught me that in the corporate jungle, predators sometimes become prey. And that justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't always feel the way you expected.